Want to give that another take?
Yeah, I think so. I wasn't quite.
That's all right. It's not a thing. It's just a
Yeah.
we just keep kind of
Yeah.
playing
Okay.
about with it, like film directors when they say, "Oh, just go wild, do an extra couple of takes," and then actually the extra takes are the best ones, and they
Yeah.
use those in the film. Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. We're back again for our Cloud State of Play. This is the August 2022 edition. I'm here again with Paul Bevan. Paul is a research director at Bloor Research. And yeah, we're going to go through yet another 3 topics that we're going to pick on for this particular month and have a chat. So let's say hello to Paul. Hello, Paul. How are you doing?
Hi, Richard. I'm fine. Thanks for the invite again. Always good to have these conversations each month. Keeps us on our toes, but good to speak to you.
Indeed, pleasure to have you back. So, Paul, for us, since we've selected 3 topics that you and I have been bouncing back and forth since the last time we talked. So let me just go through, kind of give the headline for those. The first one we're going to pick on is GitOps. That seems to be GitOps seems to be a subject that's picking up quite a lot of interest, and I'm seeing a lot more of that in terms of focus in this sort of cloud native space. The other one's kind of a sort of a equivocation of terms, a conflation of terms, which is slightly annoying, I think, and I think that's kind of something we can maybe have a go at, which is based around sort of digital transformation, cloud transformation, and things like app migration and so on. And the third one's kind of maybe coming at data from maybe two different directions. You kind of more from the sort of governance side of it, the strategy side of it, and I'll be kind of maybe a little bit more from the pragmatic side of it, sort of migration and things like that. So those are 3 topics. You've decided to accept them already, so there's no going back now, Paul. And we can kick off on those.
You may regret. Yeah. You may live to regret that, yeah. But never mind.
Indeed. Right. So let's kick off with GitOps. So what's your definition of GitOps?
What's my definition? Basically it's providing a level of quality assurance and quality management in a DevOps CI/CD pipeline. And I suppose, we've had this conversation, that it looks like a really good facility for ensuring that, once, rather than just pushing, stuff through to be implemented, it actually has to go through this sort of process of understanding whether it's going to work and what the quality of it's like, and actually having a proper pull environment in there. So from that perspective, I think it's long overdue, and that's really my basic concern, is what on earth was going on before GitOps?
Before that, yeah.
Because GitOps is, you would have thought, is an absolutely critical part of the CI/CD pipeline if you want your application to run correctly, performantly first time, please, and so from everything I've seen, there was an awful lot of cottage industry type sort of ops teams trying to fix any issues going on, which sort of tended to make a lie out of the sort of whole DevOps culture, which was that ops and dev are going to be on the sort of same page. Every time I look at GitOps, it looks good, and you think, yeah, absolutely, that's needed. But what on earth were people doing beforehand? And therefore, what was the quality of the code like coming through, and where were errors picked up and where were performance issues picked up? Because now GitOps is going to do that and actually ensure that, from a site reliability engineer's point of view, they can see and have the observability into, the state of the code that's being pushed through the pipeline or being pulled, so getting it properly organized in the CI/CD pipeline. And apologies to DevOps people if I get my terminologies wrong, because I'm not a DevOps native person. But fundamentally, that was the thing for me that looked at it. It goes, yes, that's the sort of thing that operations teams absolutely needed to have visibility on. Why has it taken so long? I think is my only sort of problem. But the fact that it's become a sort of hot topic is interesting in the sense that maybe it's the pressure of this ever increasing pace of delivery and the ever increasing criticality of the apps. Maybe when DevOps was a new kid on the block, fewer of the apps were as mission critical as they are today. And now, particularly with what happened during the pandemic and more and more stuff going online, it's just become absolutely critical that this stuff works right first time.
I agree. And I think the general treatment is that it's looking at treating infrastructure in the same way as we would kind of treat our development code. Approaching it from that sort of DevOps, mentality really, and that sort of methodology as well. So that's how kind of we have been treating sort of code development for a while, and now actually infrastructure is going to sort of get the same treatment as well. So it's kind of sort of quality line pipeline.
Yeah, we've talked in the past about how is this aligned with infrastructure as a code, and of course it is very tightly aligned with infrastructure as a code. And again, because you've abstracted everything away from the actual underlying infrastructure. That magic has to happen somewhere. And if you get the code wrong in the first place, you probably have the ability to replicate the problem far more widely and far quicker than you ever had before because of the whole infrastructure as a code piece. So I guess part of the drive for things like GitOps is that has become much more of an issue. When you were having to code thinking about what the actual underlying infrastructure was, to an extent, you were going to have to go into a little bit more detail in the code. Now you don't have to bother. So if the code's wrong, if the code's got problems in it and you haven't done due diligence within the GitOps piece, then the chances of creating issues further down the line are huge.
Yeah, and obviously, and obviously the other part of it is policy as code, actually being able to kind of bring in policies into what you're building as part of your infrastructure, and because kind of Kubernetes and those sorts of platforms kind of been kind of brought in more of a declarative approach, or basically making everything declarative, as code. We're kind of looking now at sort of declarative infrastructure really as well with GitOps, and obviously the result of that is I think what the likes of Weaveworks, for example, would call trusted delivery. So basically what you're now kind of putting out into your sort of little world of the public cloud is much more validated, and part of includes your policy as part of that infrastructure, versus kind of everybody doing their own little Terraform scripts and things like that and putting those out separately, without any governance or anything like that, and without kind of a collective way of having those sort of agreed and tested and policy and things like that as well.
And I think in order to make the whole infrastructure as a code, the whole API economy work well, having that inherent trust is going to be critical, I think it's a mindset change. Again, a lot of DevOps is seen as sort of culture change. And one of the culture changes is, the need to get things right first time, and the need to be able to observe, interestingly enough, and see the state of those, not just the code, but the APIs, for example, and again, what we're seeing is huge numbers of APIs need to be managed now, and therefore having things that are, manage that API environment. If you can pull that all into the sort of GitOps environment, I think it becomes a very powerful tool set, for site reliability engineers, but also I think to build that trust that you're talking about. I think it's absolutely critical. So it's good to see, but late to the party, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I mean, certainly I'm not necessarily kind of any particular names, but I've seen a lot of shouting from the likes of Weaveworks, CodeFresh, and this type of platforms that are appearing in this space. Include things like Argo CD, for example, and that's kind of tends to be probably one of the leading sort of open source platforms, and kind of Flux doing the agent side of that as well, where it's kind of looking for configuration drift, again, yet another term to get familiar with in this sort of in this GitOps space as well. So that's kind of the Argo CD kind of being the main tool for that, and then sort of the likes of Flux being kind of the agents that actually pick up on any changes as well that happen.
Yeah, I mean, the other area, and perhaps this is for a later discussion, is some of the commercial tools that are sort of sitting out there, things like Evolven, which is really does effectively the same thing. I'm sure we'll have a fairly interesting debate in the sort of in the wider metaverse, if you like, or the wider internet of commercial versus open source. And of course, it gets very blurred because an awful lot of commercial software is actually based on a lot of open source code, and how is that integrated in? But, again, sometimes if you're small or medium-sized or even large businesses without all the technical resource and expertise, how do you take advantage of all these, open source tools? I think so is something that, again, we probably need to revisit. This is a great little world for the people who know exactly what's going on, but for the average business out there struggling with this, there's maybe a need for the commercial product still to exist or develop alongside. So I would say, when I was looking at GitOps and you come across product like Evolve and think, well, it's doing the same thing and it's open. I was going to say open, and you also have to be careful about terminologies around open. We can conflate and miscall that one. But
considering we're trying to stop that today, Paul. So.
Exactly, that's what I'm thinking. Right. Okay, let's
try to avoid that. Ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That it's so easy to start doing that. But no, I think GitOps is looks good. I think it's going to be a great tool to help building that trust in an infrastructure as code environment. So let's watch this space.
Indeed. Right. So I mean, it is something that's kind of up and coming. So we'll certainly keep an eye on it, and maybe actually just revisit it a little bit and get a little bit deeper. At some point in the future. Okay, so on to my second favorite topic for today, which was. So you can actually, dear viewers, you can actually tell that topic 1 and topic 2 are actually chosen by me, and topic 3 is actually chosen by. I'm really excited about this one. We've kind of, I've been listening to, reading a lot, and watching a lot of kind of different types of talks and blogs and white papers and so on, and I see a lot of this kind of being these terms being thrown around. So everything from digital transformation to cloud transformation to then either app migration or cloud migration. Now, I think for me anyway, these things are, these kind of terms, these three terms are all separate, and they ought to and should mean different things. But I don't know if everybody kind of agrees on that. I've certainly kind of seen some of them being misconstrued and being used or abused, and kind of being used in the wrong place, and so on. So either somebody in marketing is getting very excited and just doing a search and replace in their Word documents and changing everything to digital transformation from whatever it was before, or there's just kind of confusion as to actually what these definitions are, and without kind of us having to necessarily stipulate what those things mean, it's important to kind of just try and maybe distinguish a little bit in terms of what they actually mean, what they entail as well, in terms of what the what an enterprise is going to be doing if they're doing something like a digital transformation versus, say, an app migration.
Yeah. it's a fairly hot topic of mine too, and one that sort of gets me hot under the collar unless I'm careful. So I'll try and rein that back in. I mean, the easiest way of looking at the three things we've talked about is a sort of hierarchical.
Right.
And at the top level is digital transformation.
Agreed.
Because that is about how do you change your organization
Correct.
to be focused on delivering services and products and solutions digitally, which means you've got to look at business process, you've got to look at the whole strategy of the business. It's a much broader thing than simply putting up a sort of e-commerce website. I've had a shop front, I've had a shop. Now I'm going to do it online as well. Therefore, I'm transforming digitally. As things have gone on over the last few years, you can see the firms that have got it right and got it wrong in terms of doing it, because they've kept their old processes and just tried to put a web front end on it. And it's, from a user perspective, that's crazy. They're not getting it doesn't make sense to the user. It's not giving them any benefit. So hierarchically, that's, it's about business transformation. We can come back later if necessary to why do you want to use the word transformation? The only other thing I would say about digital transformation is too many people see it as a one-off project.
Right. Yeah.
It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
You never finish because the world keeps changing. And at Bloor, we don't use the term digital transformation for that point of view, because people go, oh, well, that's a project. No. So we have the term mutable business,
right.
Because your business will change every day, everything going on around you. So, but that's, look at that term. So digital transformation, the highest level, cloud transformation. I mean, I've struggled a little bit with this middle one. I don't know about your view, but this sort of cloud transformation sort of smacks of, it's almost like going and saying, AWS, you need to transform the way your cloud works. And actually, I think what we're talking about is how do you make your cloud environment more effective?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's what that's all about, is that, through the way in which cloud was acquired by businesses, and what they would call the sort of gray purchasing of individual departments doing it on their credit cards and all those sort of things. Yeah. Cloud transformation to me is about how does an organization get the best out of the cloud that it can. Yeah. Simply put. And then obviously cloud migration is, once you've decided you've got a really effective cloud going, what's the process and how do you go about migrating what you want to migrate to the cloud? I was going to say everything to the cloud. I'm not sure that's the case, but what you think needs to go to the cloud, how do you go about it? So that's the sort of hierarchy that I think. If marketing departments are doing as you described, changing everything to digital transformation, they want to be taken out and shot.
Yes. I think my punishment would be a bit harsher than that, but yeah. But no, seriously though.
Slower and more painful, yes.
Exactly. Death by 1,000 paper cuts or something like that. But yeah, definitely, and I agree, digital transformation is a kind of a bigger piece, and it's a kind of an umbrella term, which could include, things like app migration or cloud migration within that, for example. Yeah. But it's not just for that, and there is other stuff going on within the enterprise that is basically, at the very basic level, digitizing a process that used to be done manually. So you're applying some kind of technology to a process, for me, that used to be done manually. So a great example of that, and this actually I discussed with a particular customer, a few years ago, it was a car manufacturer. They had dealerships and partners. And what they wanted to do was digitize that sort of customer experience when they come into the car showroom, to actually have, check out some of the models and start talking to the sales rep about, financing and models available, colors and features of the cars and the models and so on. So that process would normally mean that the sales representative would go and get a catalog, a paper catalog of all the models, and start flicking through and then going, yes, this one has air conditioning, that one has, sat nav, and things like that, and yes, it's available in yellow, yes, it's available in whatever colors and so on. So now I see if that was DX'd, if that was digitally transformed, that experience, the sales rep would actually come up with a tablet in their hand, and then they would show on the tablet all the features, all the functions, all the models, all the financing capabilities. And actually you could take that to a even further level where as the sales rep's actually tapping onto the screen and interacting with this kind of application, the application is feeding data back to HQ in real time, and the AI that's kind of analyzing the data, analyzing that stream of data, is actually sending back real-time stuff, because the customer said, oh, do you have it in yellow for that particular model? The app could be also presenting or putting up on the screen for the sales rep information about the yellow model. So there could be like a trade-in deal on the yellow model, or they could decide to offer a trade-in deal for this customer on the yellow model to entice the customer to actually purchase that product, right? And that's how I kind of see digital transformation, that you're taking what used to be a manual process, you've digitized it, and you've applied some logic and sort of analytics and so on, some kind of AI at the back end as well, to kind of make it a little bit more interactive. In this case, to kind of entice the customer to actually buy that model. And that for me would be a great example. And like I said, this is what I was discussing with that particular customer, a number of years ago. I also agree with your, not the cynical, but the correct definition of cloud transformation that you mentioned as well. So yeah, so that is definitely for those customers who were either pioneers in the cloud or just grown organically in the cloud, but unfortunately kind of grown without a strategy, without a policy, without any governance applied to the cloud. So as you said, kind of stick your credit card into the slot, so to speak, and then just kind of done that in a very siloed approach. So they're now kind of coming back, because that's sort of biting them in the backside in terms of the issues that they're having about governance, security, data sovereignty, you name it.
Cost.
And now there's cost, exactly. And they're now saying, yeah, exactly. And now they're saying, actually, hang on, we need to do this properly. So we need a partner who's going to consult and help us to do this, and we need to do this properly and approach it from a something with some kind of governance, some kind of policy applied to it, some kind of finance policy applied to it, and then bring in things like FinOps and so on to help rein in some of those sort of cloud costs as well. And then yes, absolutely, the third, again, I completely agree with you in terms of migrating apps, so kind of doing an app migration or a so-called cloud migration. That's where you're kind of really just looking at the applications that you have, and you're vacating your data center or your current sort of computing environment for whatever reason. And there's a number of reasons. We won't go into all the details of that, but for whatever reason, there is an impetus, there's a drive to migrate to the cloud, and then you're looking at the low-hanging fruits and identifying what those low-hanging fruits are by doing your usual sort of assessment and dependency mapping and so on, and then you're deciding on those sort of early migrations that you're going to do, those sort of low-hanging fruits that you're going to do first, and then you start the process of migration. So I think that's, and I agree with you on those are kind of the three sort of layers, as you said, that that we can use these terms in. But I just see a lot of kind of confusion in marketing and presentations, and even people who kind of stand up and do this stuff when they talk about it. It's a little bit like we may come back to this term in the future, cybersecurity, when everybody just throws out the word cybersecurity, and it could mean anything. It could be infrastructure security, it could be cloud security, because data security could be person security and individual security, user security, all sorts of stuff, right? But they just kind of throw out this word, cybersecurity. So again, I'm seeing, digital transformation, cloud transformation, and then sort of app migration or cloud migration, again, being sort of interchangeably used sometimes. And I think that's incorrect.
Yeah, unfortunately, and this is not a new phenomenon. I think, IT going back decades has, come up with new terms for things of which the rest of the market then suddenly jumps on, because actually they're all quite difficult to nail down. It's loose enough usually that says, well, that could be part of cloud transformation, or that could be part of digital transformation. Well, yes, it might be, but actually dressing it up as digital transformation or cloud transformation can be the wrong thing to do. I just think, cloud generally has been misunderstood by an awful lot of marketing departments. And we tend to take a view that says, actually look at cloud as being it's a consumption mechanism. Because the minute you try and get into and you listen to people trying to explain, what cloud is technically, is just, a nightmare, for anybody who's not technically oriented, trying to listen to it, because you can pull yourself into all sorts of knots, when you get into infrastructure as a service and platform as a service and software as a service, and most people who are not technology oriented lose the will to live. But that's, again, plays into the fact that people have heard the term cloud. So anything that's got cloud in it has got to be good, almost by definition now. So cloud migration, cloud transformation, digital transformation, although it doesn't say cloud, is almost like, oh, we ought to be doing that, shouldn't we? And oh, yes, you should. And by the time you're in the middle of it, you're going, this isn't as easy as we thought, or this isn't doing what I thought it was going to do. That's what you tend to hear from people, is that, or you take cloud transformation, we thought cloud was going to be cheaper. Yes, it can be. Yes. It should be. But you go about it the wrong way, trying to take the wrong applications to the cloud and not completely rewriting them, and find it doesn't work very well there, or you don't have control over that cloud in terms of turning off instances when you can, and actually making sure the right instances are right, all those sort of things. But there's a sort of general acceptance, if you say cloud, it's got to be good. And I think that's the challenge as much as anything else, is getting people to think, yes, it is changing.
Yes, it should be. Exactly.
It should be, but don't take it for granted. I mean, when you look at the component parts, and I think we've probably had this conversation in one of these calls before, it's the classic swan syndrome, isn't it?
Yes.
On the surface, it looks really smooth and easy, but my God, somebody's paddling hard underneath. Usually the developers and the apps and the operations team paddling like fury to bring it all together.
Yeah, with GitOps and DevOps.
With GitOps and DevOps. And I always say to people, if you want to get a sense of the complexity of all the bits and pieces that need to go together, look at the cloud native, Compute Foundation's CloudTrail, and go, actually, okay, you can live with half of it or 3/4 of it, but to do it really well, you need to think about all the component parts that are in the CNCF CloudTrail. And that doesn't even start with data, which is what the next topic we're going to come on to. So, and so it's, and everybody sort of gets very uptight about old mainframes, or this, that, and the other. The glory of the old mainframe was that they did everything for you. Now you've actually got everything that was embedded in that black box of a mainframe that locked you in theory. The actual underpinning technologies are not that dissimilar, but now they've all been taken out of the box, thrown on the table, and people are told, put it together. That's a challenge.
Yeah, that's Pandora's box has been opened.
But it's the Lego box. You get the picture of the Lego, on the front. It looks really great, and then you open the box, and there's thousands of red, white, and yellow pieces. And it says, now put these together.
Together,
Okay, all right. And if you follow the instructions, it works and it looks really good. If you don't follow the instructions, you don't have to get some odd looking Lego.
End up with something completely different.
Yeah, correct.
Exactly. Right. Okay. So let's move on to the third topic about data. Now, as we said, you're kind of going to approach it your sort of way, which is a bit more about sort of policy and strategy and governance and things like that. I wanted to kind of mention a few things from a pragmatic point of view, but I'll let you kind of lead on that, and then I'll come in.
I think the driver for that is, I have to say that, I'm research director for infrastructure, so my data colleagues might get quite upset with me if I start talking about all this stuff, but hey, I'll live with that.
They can come on for a separate debate if you like.
Yeah, we could get them on, it'd be interesting. But I think the concern has come with, two or three things happening. Firstly is the explosion of the amount of data that's now kicking around out there with, edge computing and IoT particularly. So, I mean, huge amounts of data, and the challenges then of the data warehouse being replaced by the data lake, and data sitting in all sorts of potential silos, is that if you talk about, what's my data migration to the cloud strategy or what's my backup strategy, you don't even know where all your data is, how good the quality is, and it just feels in this sort of ever accelerating environment where new apps coming in and new compute paradigms coming in, that data is being created and pulled and put places without any real thought as to how the quality of that data, if I put my end user hat on, and a fairly sort of non-technical end user hat on, businesses were told in the old days that data wasn't important, it was information. And therefore, but in that little sentence lies a multitude of issues, because you won't get decent information if your data's corrupt, if your data's out of date, if all those sort of issues. So I think what I was coming to here was, we talk about where do you put your data? Do you put it in the cloud? The reality is you're going to have data in multiple locations. Therefore, what's the governance issue around that? How do you use either data virtualization or even federated data to actually give you a single view of, the data you've got and the information you've got that you can use and report in a different way, but that the apps can actually use? Because again, part of, apps and infrastructure, that was always a problem. What infrastructure was the app going to work on? What's the data that the apps are going to have to access and work on, and where is it? And do they need to know how that's stored? Whether, we talked about a block, object, storage, and all those sort of different types of storage, file storage, etc. And actually what you want is your apps not to have to worry about that. But again, what they do need to worry about is what's the quality of the data. So that's where I'm coming from. And that's where I think there is still a big gap out there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think I'm not seeing enough, even with customers really, and just kind of moving slightly to the pragmatic approach, or sort of from a pragmatic POV. I'm not seeing enough strategy on that. I'm not seeing enough kind of, having, a understanding of what is required, and and even actually having just a direction, in terms of where sort of enterprise want to go. So so my sort of thing is, I remember when I was at IBM and I had somebody was presenting about data. This was around the time, as you just mentioned, where storage was kind of being broken up into sort of file, object, and block type of data, and somebody mentioned the 3 V's or the 5 V's. I can't remember. I could be completely wrong on that number, but there was like a number of words that started with the letter V. So there's things like the veracity of data, the velocity of data, and whatever the other V's were. I can't remember them, unfortunately. I'll try and put them in the description if I dig up my notes from that presentation. But anyway, point being is that data sort of is changing, the structure is changing. We've got unstructured data now. We have, non-SQL sort of, databases. And I'm not really sure that customers or enterprises in general, organizations in general, are actually aware of the implications of kind of moving data, apart from simple stuff that we used to worry about, like sovereignty. Actually, sovereignty has become the simplest thing to, that we can actually guarantee now, probably. And now it's more about, are we moving data that actually deserves to be moved? Are we moving the right data? Are we moving it into the right place in the cloud when we migrate, for example, from the data center? I mean, I have had customers approach in the past and even recently where, they're talking about, discussing the migration from a database point of view. And I'm thinking, well, hang on, what happens to the applications that are hanging off of those databases? I appreciate that your SQL Server license and support and extended support and so on is all end of life, and Microsoft doesn't want to touch it anymore. And now you're all of a sudden feeling the urgency of moving your 200 plus SQL servers into the cloud. And I appreciate you want to put them into Azure SQL or whatever kind of on the other side. But, what happens to the applications that are hanging off of these? You can't just kind of move the databases and not move the apps. So this has to be a holistic approach. And I am seeing that as an example. And people have approached me in the past umpteen number of times where that's kind of come up, and we've had to kind of steer it back and say, well, hang on, we need to do an assessment and we need to see what the dependencies are and then see what the applications require. So we can't just kind of move all your Oracle stuff into the Oracle cloud or into one of the other sort of public clouds, or kind of even more complicated, just move the data out of Oracle and put them somewhere else. We have to kind of see what the applications are and actually look at the data's function and what the data is actually doing, and whether actually the data deserves to be migrated.
There'll be a number of dependencies, won't there? I mean,
Exactly.
And actually there are some good tools out there that will map your complete environment and show you all the links that says which are the ones where I can detach both the app and the data fairly readily and take it up to the cloud without huge implications for everything else. And the ones with much bigger implications, then you need to do exactly what you just said. Sit down, think about it. How the hell are we going to do this? So again, it's a bit like the original, low-hanging fruit piece. When it comes to data, you've got to see where all the sort of dependencies are and where all the links are. And I say there are some interesting and useful tools out there that will draw that picture for you and say, well, here are the 3 or 4 applications and its attached data that could be moved almost overnight. Here's the next half a dozen that they've got quite a but is doable. The next lot, these are going to take a lot longer and think a lot harder about it. But you're right; companies have got to get their head around that.
Yeah, and it's, if you have the opportunity to, ETL the data to actually cleanse the data, then that's you should be looking at considering to do that. If you can migrate to a more cost-effective database on the other side of the fence, again, you should be looking at that. And if you can also incorporate some kind of analytics, some kind of AI, ML, whatever business intelligence as it used to be called, to the destination, to where your data ends up being, again, that should be considered as part of the strategy, because we talked about data lakes and warehouses and so on, and none of that kind of really gets mined for data, in a sort of an aggressive way these days. So if you are going to kind of move that across, then you should be looking at the likes of Tableau, Data IQ or EQ. I can't remember how they pronounce their name, but those kinds of guys will kind of work in that space. And the other one that's really, I think, important is how you're really whether, as we said, whether all of that data deserves to be migrated. So a lot of the times, enterprises sort of purchase an enterprise license, a company-wide license, whatever you want to call it, for a leading database of some kind or another. And then what happens is, because they've purchased that license, and that license is expensive, and then you apply all of your sort of skills, and you do training, and suddenly you've got DBAs, kind of very skilled on that, platform. Any data that then, or any application that requires a database, whether it actually deserves to be in that sort of very expensive platform or not, because you have an enterprise sort of license and a policy that gets formed around that platform, that application ends up using that database whether it needs it or not. So whether it needs that sort of high availability and sort of the resilience and the performance and so on or not, because that platform is the enterprise standard, all applications end up storing their data in it, whether they actually need that platform or not, whether they could easily and happily live on a open source database running in the background. And I came across this all the time when I was installing software. I'd say, oh, well, this app that I'm installing has got a little database, is going to install in the background. You don't have to worry about it. It's self-managed. And the DBAs would scream at me and say, no, you're not allowed to do that. Our corporate standard is XYZ, and your app has got to point to our corporate standard. So then what should have been a 2-hour installation ends up being a 2-week process, because I have to fill in forms and ask for AD accounts and service accounts, and also, apart from installing the application, the database bit would kind of take me a week or two to actually get it up and running.
Yeah, and I think that world has passed, in the sense that a lot of different types of databases are needed for the applications to perform. I mean, you're getting increasingly, and I think as we go towards more automation of business process, the use of graph databases, the use of time series databases becomes absolutely critical. So this idea that there is one, relational database. I mean, there are still people trying to do time series work in Oracle databases. Not, and Oracle is very clever in the sense that it can handle it, but it handles it far less efficiently than a proper time series database. Yeah. And if you're going for, business process automation, you're going to need, and declarative type environments, you're going to need graph databases, not relational databases. So all those, but then that comes back to the underlying data. If you can virtualize it, i.e. the metadata and, the description, you won't necessarily need to physically move it unless latency is an issue, and then all those, so I think there's a whole process of, looking at data virtualization, and stopping getting this idea that one database centrally held, wherever that's on the cloud or because you can replicate that bad practice into the cloud if you want. It says everything has to point to that, Oracle Online. I'm sorry, we're picking on Oracle, shouldn't do that. But I mean, you're picking on that proprietary database. Yeah. It's now in the cloud. So all you've done is to shift where it's at. You haven't shifted the problem that says, is that the best mechanism to get the most out of your data? And so back to my original one was, you need to start thinking about, governance, strategy, purpose of what you're trying to do. That then says, what are the best tools? How do I migrate? And again, you go through the same process doing cloud. What do I migrate? How do I migrate it? Do I need to migrate it? Can I virtualize so that I don't need to think about, ETL? You talked about it, ETL. Wouldn't it be lovely if you didn't have to do ETL? And actually you could use virtualization to get data to get around the ETL challenge of, extract, transform, load again. Yeah. So all those sort of issues. So I think there's a whole area. And again, this is one which I think has been not properly investigated or by organizations in terms of the move to the cloud. Data has been almost like the afterthought. Oh no, and you're right. Sovereignty. Help. What do I do about sovereignty? But it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut, I think.
Indeed. Excellent. Okay. Well, again, Paul, as always, I appreciate your thoughts. It's been a great talk, I think, for this month. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to do a September one. So, yeah, start thinking about scratch your head about some subjects that we can pick on.
I'm sure we'll
Moan
find,
about.
I'm sure we'll find some. Yeah, we ought to start calling this Curmudgeon's Corner, I think.
Something like that. Yeah. Some kind of rant. I think the word's rant.
Sometime a rant. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, yeah, appreciate you coming on, Paul. Thanks very much. And yeah, so any sort of details and stuff that Paul and I have discussed, I'll try and include some links in the description. I'm sure Paul will supply me with some bits and pieces that might be useful in the 3 topics that we've discussed this month. But yeah, it only leaves me to thank Paul, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks very much. Speak to you soon. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the talk, please subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.